So last week I watched Captain Marvel and I'm not gonna lie, I thought it was mid. This is easily one of the worst films of the MCU. But I still hear. Brie Larson is woefully miscasted as Captain Marvel and nothing more than a poor man's Emily Blunt. Captain Marvel herself is an unlikable Mary Sue protagonist. Seriously, Brie Larson can't act to save her own damn life. Nick Fury has been turned from a badass to a complete dumbass, and they transformed the Skrulls from being the evil shape-shifting badasses from the comic books and cartoons into sympathetic pussy refugees. The story is a blatant rip-off of The Long Kiss Goodnight with Geena Davis and Samuel L. Jackson. The action set pieces are boring because there is no suspense and there are no stakes. I mean, Captain Marvel was so useless in Endgame that you could have cut her out of the film completely and nothing would have changed. Also, where the hell was she when the Chitauri attacked New York City in the Avengers? Why didn't she help the Guardians of the Galaxy defend Xander from Ronan's invasion? Why didn't she arrive when Ultron was planning to wipe humanity off the face of the earth? Or better yet, where the fuck was she during the events of Avengers Infinity War? Wow. She's easily the worst hero ever. Well, let's find out. Plot. I had to thought plot him. We start with an introduction that pays tribute to Stan Lee because, as you all know, he passed away a few months before the premiere of this movie. I really like this and it's a nice detail, too bad that it was used on one of the worst movies in the MCU. Later on in the movie, when Carol and her team arrive on the planet, at first they act with stealth and for some reason their transmitters malfunction without explanation, when they were previously established as a very technologically advanced race that can make jumps through galaxies. When the Skrulls were analyzing Carol's memories, Talos was not able to recognize the place those memories took place, which is Earth. Later they show us that they were orbiting next to it. This is a huge error. How was Talos able to get to Earth if he didn't know the existence of said place? This allows Carol to escape and land on Earth. This is too forced and only happens for the plot to advance quickly. Once there, Carol falls inside a video store. She gets up and walks around the place. She destroys a cardboard figure by throwing a lightning bolt at it. Then she goes outside and meets a security guard who asks him if he has any communication device, to which he points out a telephone booth. I have some issues with this. How did he didn't see something fall from the sky that broke the roof of the video store, nor Carol's lightning bolt that shattered the glass? He seemed very calm in his car before Carol talked to him, and he was parked in front of the video store. In the next scene we have a group of Skrulls walking through the beach, and they decide to transform into some surfers that were there because is their characteristic ability. Now I do have an issue with this. What are the Skrulls doing coming out of the beach? Where's their ship? Did it crash, or did they think it was a good idea to land in the sea? If it was the first option, how did no one noticed? Unless it crashed during the night, but in that case they'll have been swimming for hours, which doesn't make sense. And if it was the second option, why did they think it was a good idea? Returning with Carol, we see that she picks up a phone and contacts Jan Rog to update him on everything, but the call is immediately cut off, and shortly after the police appears. I have not only one or two, but three issues with this. The first error is that it is daytime and she is still in the video store. Did Carol really spend the whole night hacking a phone? Because when she spoke to the guard it was still very dark. The second error is that they have universal translators, spaceships, energy weapons, and an amazing technology, but they need to hack a telephone booth to contact with their people. Is there really something special about a phone from 1995 to be able to contact with another galaxy? And the third error is that the police also comes during the day. How is this possible? Is the guard a moron and called them the next day, or the police are morons themselves and it took them all the night to arrive? Along with the police, Nick Fury and Phil Coulson are also here, but much younger. Keep this in mind. There is a huge continuity error with the redesign of Nick that contradicts two previous movies, but I'll explain it at the end. Just when they were going to arrest her, a Skrull appears and shoots them, which is very convenient, all night with the phone, and they decide to appear just now. The Skrull starts to escape on a train while Carol chases him, and Nick does the same in a car. But then the Skrull transforms into an old lady, and for some reason none of the passengers on the train notice that a boy young with blonde hair suddenly became an old woman from one moment to another. And no, I'm not assuming anything, because the Skrull entered the train and he was still in his white boy form. Carol ends up finding the Skrull and starts to beat him up, but of the people try to stop her because she is beating up an old woman who knows how to do acrobatics, but she is old after all. I do have an issue with this. When she moves throughout the train, people leave her alone and don't try to stop her. A woman hits an older lady, and when she chases her on the train, everyone lets her go. Pretty stupid. This is a small nitpick. It wouldn't have mattered regardless, but is just an unnatural way in how the passengers behave. In the end, the fight extends to the roof and a plate from the train falls on top of Nick's car. And for some reason it doesn't even put a scratch in it, when it should have at least damaged the car even just a little. Later on, suddenly Coulson calls Nick and tells him that he is still in the video store. Then he discovers that he actually had a Skrull in the car and ends up crashing for fighting with him. There is two huge problems here. First, how did it took Coulson so long to call Nick and didn't notice until now that he was left alone? Second, remember how previously the Skrull that Carol was chasing got into a fight with her before leaving, right? Okay, how did Coulson not hear what was going on outside? In the end, the Skrull manages to escape and Carol tries to localize a bar that she had some memories of thanks to her gauntlet. But then some biker appears and behaves like an asshole with her, so as punishment she steals his motorcycle and as an extra some clothes from a store. Okay, I wanted to break down this scene for two reasons. 1. How the hell did she manage to steal the guy's bike? Did he really just left the keys there? LMAO. And second, this movie wants to treat Carol as an example to follow only to have her commit theft crimes. Stealing a guy's bike just because they talked shit about you and as an extra stealing clothes from a person's store isn't exactly an example to follow. Returning with Nick, we see that his eye got hurt, but it is nothing serious. This is stupid. Nick supposedly lost his eye because he trusted someone, and what better way than to be betrayed by a Skrull who pretended to be a teammate? They completely fucked this up later even more with another dumbass thing, but we'll get there when we'll get there. Later they analyze the Skrull, but shortly after, we see that his boss is actually Talos in disguise, who feels the loss of his friend. But for some reason little earlier he wanted to see his cock for a bad joke, lol. In the end, Carol arrives at the bar and suddenly Nick appears there. In fact, he was already there before her and he was waiting for her. How is this possible? How could he know that she was going to that bar if only Carol knew, thanks to the gauntlet? After Nick and Carol talk to confirm both of them aren't Skrulls, and destroying a radio because why not, Nick takes her to a base where Dr. Lawson used to work. They sneak into a room and find Agus, the cat who screwed up the origin of a good story. Later they arrive to a warehouse where they consult some documents about Lawson, in which they discover that it belongs to the Kree and had the plans for a very strange engine prototype, but she died years ago crashing it together with another pilot. However, they manage to find clues about the friend Carol, whose name is Maria Rambeau. At one point, Nick asks her to wait and she contacts Yanrog again to tell him everything she discovered, but at the same time, what Nick did was call S.H.I.E.L.D. to have her arrested. But he discovers that his boss is a Skrull, and in the end they end up having a fight in that warehouse. My issue with this is that when he fights with Talos, none of the other guards come to his aid even though they are making a fuss, but a while ago he threw a metal box and he distracted them all. And for some reason when Carol arrives to help Fury, the guards now arrive to help. Why didn't Carol throw her lightning at the guards to end them all in one fell swoop? There was no need for them to escape by doing what they did, lol. Later, they arrive at a hangar and they escape with a plane which Carol somehow knows how to pilot. Another huge issue, Carol supposedly by this point doesn't remember anything about her past, meaning she would have none of her pilot skills, so how was she able to pilot the plane? Also, the cat was there in the plane, even though the last time we saw the cat he was in the middle of a hallway. After Nick and Carol go to see Rambo and at the same time Yon-Rogg arrives on Earth, at first Ronan wanted to bombard it, but he tells him that first he wants to get Carol out of there and they will bomb it later. Later on, Nick and Carol locate Maria and they catch up with everything. Apparently both she and her daughter recognized Carol at the moment, so they say a couple of things, and the only relevant thing is that the pilot who had died with Lucen was her. Now for some reason, Nick didn't tell anyone at S.H.I.E.L.D. that his boss was an infiltrated Skrull, which is a gigantic negligence, but since the movie is made by people with no brain, it doesn't matter. A few hours later, Talos appears drinking soda and we are supposed to laugh. Now I imagine that he discovered their location thanks to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s documents or something, but no, he simply appears out of nowhere somehow. After so much fighting, he decides to come on good terms and brings them the black box of the plane in which Carol crashed in the past. How did he obtain it? After several bad jokes and clarifying that the cat is a flare, they hear the black box that helps Carol remember her past. Lucen was trying to escape from the Kree to prevent them from taking over the prototype of the reactor that she made, and Carol was helping her, but in the end they crashed. And somehow they don't die or receive any significant damage apart from some blood in the nose. LMAO, they should be dead. Lucen reveals that her real name is Marvel and that she is a Kree. Yon-Rogg shoots her and kills her. Carol's reaction to this is complete ass. It seems like she practically doesn't give a fuck. Lucen is supposedly the person she admires the most because the Supreme Intelligence adopted her form, but here they shoot her and look at her. It doesn't seem like it affected her at all. Yon-Rogg aims at Carol and she manages to distract him in a very ridiculous way, giving her time to destroy the reactor and absorb the energy wave, and this was the origin of her powers. However, she lost her memories and Yon-Rogg took her to his planet to use her as a weapon and the memories ran out. When Carol discovers the truth, Talos explains to her that the Skrulls were actually fleeing from the Kree. What I no longer understand is why they didn't join the Nova Corps or something. It's always better than going as a beggar through space. This is not an issue though, just something I wondered. Apparently they need to find the coordinates of Marvel's space laboratory, but in the end it was in Earth's orbit and it was easy to find, so they start preparing for the deployment. Rambo doesn't want to go on the mission because it's dangerous and she doesn't want to leave her daughter alone, but then she convinces her and reproaches to her that she is giving her a bad example. Which is completely moronic. If she does not want to go on the mission, it's precisely because it's very dangerous, and if something were to happen to her, which is very likely, they would put her in an orphanage. She would not be able to study a career, she would have to work at 16 and basically her life would be ruined since she's a single mother. What the fuck is this shit about her giving a bad example? Okay, she is a girl, but it is clear that this little message was something from the directors, but from what you can see they didn't think about it too much, because what a stupid thing. Now it turns out that worrying about your family is giving a bad example. Somehow the girl knows how to configure an alien gauntlet, which is what allows Carol to change the colors of her suit. LMAOO. In the next scene we see Yon-Rogg interrogating Carol, but in reality it was a Skrull and he kills him. Meanwhile the others are in space and find the laboratory, but there is something else because they had the Tesseract stored inside, and to fuck it up even more, they go and keep it in a fucking lunchbox. What the fuck is this? Did they forgot that the Tesseract melted the floor of a plane after sending Red Skull to another planet? And now they can keep it in a lunchbox without anything happening. LMAOO. Shortly after they found Talos's family, and in that laboratory there were many Skrulls refuged there, and the objective of their leader was to find them, but suddenly the Kree appear. Was nobody really guarding the entrance? And how did the Kree found them in the first place? How did they know the Skrulls were hiding there? Thanks to the chip in Carol's neck, the Kree immobilize her and they capture the others. I have an issue with this. After Carol discovered that she got her powers thanks to a reactor and that her whole life was a lie, why did she never though of removing the chip she had in her neck? Once again they have her talk to the Supreme Intelligence, but she resists and begins to fight with it while they bombard her with memories full of sexism and oppression, because we already know that her life was unfortunate because of men who didn't let her drive a cart at 200 per hour when she was 5 years old and made fun of her in the army. In the end she manages to break the chip and releases her true powers, then she helps others and the Skrulls are freed. How were the Skrulls able to escape if they were locked up in a cell and watched by some guards? The Skrulls use the flare to beat all of the Kree. Now before continuing, I do have an issue. How did no one could have discovered this cat was a flare before after spending years in that desert base? At one point, Carol has a fight with her old team. My issue with this is that Carol should have easily beat them all in 5 seconds, but for some reason she doesn't, and they extend the fight so unnecessarily that it ends up being boring. There is so much difference in power that it seems that Carol is just playing. So after defeating them all, the Skrulls flee in the airship, but they shoot Talos. Talos wouldn't have been shot had Carol stopped fucking around for no reason and just blasted them all in seconds. An amazing hero. Now we have a filler chase in which they defeat the typical secondary villain that nobody knows or what his/her name is, and at the end of it all Jan arrives at Earth and Carol throws himself at him, showing that she can also fly, although for some reason when Carol is falling down they put this part as if there was a risk of death in case of hitting the ground, when at the beginning of the movie we saw how she fell into a video store from the atmosphere without anything happening to her, but it seems that the directors have already forgotten. Carol manages to crash Jan's ship and Ronan appears, ready to throw some nuclear missiles at the Earth. Then of course Carol flies towards them and it ends up destroying them. Now for some reason it seems like they made a mistake, and instead of firing nuclear missiles, they fired normal missiles, because that's not a nuclear explosion. Who did Ronan intended to kill with those firecrackers? Seriously, is it the most powerful thing he has? LOL. In between the transmitters and the missile scene, I don't know which one is worse. After Carol deals with all of his ships and missiles, Ronan gets scared and for some reason she lets him escape. Very brave, Captain Marvel. Excellent. You just condemned thousands of living beings, because in the the next 21 years, this guy dedicated himself to killing the Nova Corps and carrying out attacks against anyone who is considered an enemy of the Kree. Yeah, just let the Guardians of the Galaxy take care of it. Why capture him or put an end to him? Yeah, we let him escape instead. Once on the surface and with Jan cornered, he challenges her to a hand-to-hand duel, but she throws him a magical lightning bolt and defeats him, saying that she has nothing to prove. Okay, what just happened has two sides. The first thing is that if I had superpowers I would have done the same thing. It's a matter of common sense. But the bad part is that we are watching a boring movie, and now that the final conflict has arrived, you go and spill this garbage. Why didn't she do the same thing in the ship to deal with the 7v1? Or why they don't give us a confrontation against Ronan, who surely offers a much more interesting fight? But no, we better put a Power Ranger receiving a beating that surely entertains the public. Okay, I said it before, I said it again, if she has nothing to prove and you put so much emphasis on that fact, what you are implying is that you are actually trying to prove that you have nothing to prove. I will explain it in a simpler way. If she had limited herself to throwing the lightning bolt and keeping quiet, it would have been good. Disappointing, but good. But if you put so much emphasis on Jan telling her to prove her worth and then putting us in the foreground focusing on her face to say the little phrase, the only thing they get is to show that what the directors are most concerned about is making Carol seem like an empowered woman rather than demonstrating said empowerment. I am aware that it is a bit convoluted, but it's not easy to explain. This criticism is more directed at the director's perspective rather than Carol's character. The problem was the way in which they filmed this part and how forced the message was, but not the message itself. There are better ways to convey it, but they did it that way because it is much easier to do this type of thing than to develop a character in depth. After the fight, Carol sends Yon-Rogg back to his planet and makes it clear that she will return to end the war, and as we could see in Guardians of the Galaxy, she failed miserably because Ronan continued to kill people and the Kree are still terrible people. So you'll tell me, what has she done in these years? And now comes what for me was the worst part of the movie, and that is that Nick is fooling around with the cat and then the cat scratches him, leaving him blind in one eye. Do y'all remember everything they said in Winter Soldier about him losing an eye for trusting someone? Because they just threw it all overboard and replaced it with a dumb-ass joke. Congratulations, y'all just threw a plotline with immense potential to shit. Once at home, we can see that Nick doesn't give a fuck about having lost his eye, and instead of going to the hospital he starts singing and acting like a clown, which is a behavior that is not in line with his character. Carol gives him the famous communicator that we saw in Infinity War so that he can call her in case of emergency, and in the end she goes to end the war and to find a place for the Skrulls. In the post-credit scene we see Nick giving rise to the Avengers Initiative and has the Flareton, who is not at all a potential danger. In the second scene, Carol arrives at the Avengers base after the snap, and finally in the last scene, the Flareton vomits the Tesseract and this nonsense is finally over. Other issues I have, if I had to summarize it in a few words, I would say that this is a bad movie, poorly implemented and very boring, and as usual, whenever I say something, I explain why. To start off, the pacing was not good. They spend all of the time trying to recover Carol's memories from here to there, and then the few fights that happen consist of a handful of extras getting beaten up, and when we finally have the final battle, it's resolved in the most disappointing way possible. With the exception of Nick Fury, the characters are very generic and plain. The protagonist is the typical Mary Sue who does not convey empathy to the audience. She has less than charisma, and the few times she tries to be funny it ends up being uncomfortable. If you spend the entire movie like that, don't try to be funny because you just can't do it. The difference in power between Carol and the villains is just insane, just like in Iron Man 3, but even worse. If we are going to have a strong protagonist, we should give him/her a strong villain so that things are fair, but no. Instead we are going to put the Space Power Rangers facing the nerfed captain, and when the movie is about to end we give her the real powers. Is it so hard to put characters on par? Captain Marvel resists blows like Hulk, has the physical strength of Thor, lightning like Iron Man, and can fly. If we have such a powerful character, it's really disappointing to see how a bunch of useless people give her problems when in reality she could solve the conflict in a matter of seconds, but of course, if she solves it in seconds it's also disappointing. In situations like this you have no choice but to put a strong villain, or else it's going to be a horrible movie. The Skrulls went from being characters with potential and a real threat to being completely wasted. Their designs are also not very good. The thing about Nick's eye was another stupid thing, and it seemed to me as a lack of respect towards a plot with potential started by the Russo brothers. If they had still done it, okay, but when someone else does it and it ruins it in such a way, they should be ashamed. I don't know who thought it was a good idea. Now it's time to talk about the big errors I mentioned earlier that show how badly they implemented this movie. The thing about the Tesseract in the lunchbox shows that the directors behind this movie have no idea about Marvel or the Infinity Stones, and things like this make me wonder why they continue to hire people who can seem to get away with this. Then there's the redesign of the Nick, which can only be described as terrible, both physically and psychologically. He went from being a serious and intimidating guy to a clown who only acts silly because why not? But here comes the first inconsistency. In Winter Soldier we saw a photo in which he still had his eye, he was bald, he had his characteristic beard, and he held a high position in S.H.I.E.L.D., and in this movie he has hair, he is shaved, and has a low rank in S.H.I.E.L.D. This single plot hole is enough to humiliate the movie, but don't worry, there is another one. In Iron Man 2 there is a moment in which Nick tells Tony that he worked with his father and before he died he gave him a box that had a movie and etc., not going to explain it. Howard Stark died at the hands of the Winter Soldier in 1991, just as we saw in Civil War, so he should have given him the box long before the events of this movie. Are you telling me that Howard Stark himself entrusted a box to some random low-ranking agent to give it to Tony 20 years later? And well, low-ranking in 1995, but maybe before 1991 he was the concierge of SHIELD LMAO. Seriously, this is terrible. Is it really that difficult to get a little of information before doing these things? Even if it's just looking at Wikipedia. Unfortunately, there's still more plot holes. In the first Avengers movie, Fury wanted to use the Tesseract to create nuclear weapons capable of fighting alien threats because when Thor arrived in New Mexico for the first time he realized that they were not alone in the universe and therefore the human race was not prepared to repel a large-scale invasion. This is emphasized very clear during the 2012 movie. But now they come to tell us that Nick already knew the Kree, the Skrulls, and a Flair since 1995. This is what I meant when I said it was poorly implemented. It doesn't reach at the level of others, but it is very close. When having a big cinematic universe, you have to be very careful every time you incorporate a new movie, but if it's a prequel you have to be 10 times more careful because you are touching things from the past. But these people seem to not care. Okay, after demonstrating with arguments why the movie is bad, I am going to emphasize a few things, and now I am going to talk about feminism. The feministic perspective of this movie is poorly made, and I am going to explain to you why. All the stereotype male characters are quite unrealistic and they are saturated with each other. Now obviously assholes are everywhere and it's not unusual to bump into one from time to time, but what does not seem logical to me is that she has a dickhead of a father, a dickhead of a brother, some dickhead comrades from the army, the guy at the bar is a dickhead, the guy on the motorcycle is also dickhead. Well, I guess you already know where things are going. It makes no sense for feminists in cinema to complain about the stereotypes of women and at the same time they dedicate themselves to promote other stereotypes but with men. If that is not double standards for you, then tell me what it is. I said it before and I repeat it here. There may be one or two assholes, but don't try to make me believe that all men who she had to live with treated her like an object, because you are giving a distorted image that's very far from the truth. And the worst of all is that there are tons of extremely manipulable girls between 12 and 16 years old who will think that this is the case in real life, and that can lead to incitement to hatred. It may be intentional or not, but it's like that because there are people who allow themselves to be influenced by anything. Half of today's society is lobotomized by the media and entertainment, so you have to be very careful when transmitting a message, because if you do it wrong, believe me, there will be consequences. Something else that is very poorly done is the supposedly empowerment of Carol. The message of improvement is very good, it's excellent, great, I would even dare to say that it's amazing, but once again it's poorly conveyed for 3 reasons. The first of which is because Carol is not an example to follow, and I will explain why. If they tell you not to go so fast and you step on the accelerator, you are not empowering yourself by opposing a man. What you are doing is putting your life at risk. Being irresponsible does not mean being empowered and such. As stated in this movie, it seems that the best thing a woman can do is ignore everyone and do whatever she wants, regardless of the consequences, and well, the fact that Carol behaves like a criminal already speaks for itself. This woman steals motorcycles, clothes, destroys radios that are not from her, destroys the roof of a train, a doorknob, etc. It is one thing to cause destruction in the middle of a fight and without intention, and quite another to go on your own and screw everyone. You seriously consider a person like this an example to follow? In my town you go to jail for this type of things. And here instead they treat her as a feminist icon. If this type of people represents women, I don't know what to tell you. Okay, this is it. The first reason why I consider that her empowerment is poorly represented. The second reason is because said message of improvement comes to nothing. The girl has worked her entire life to enlist in the Air Force, getting up again and again and ignoring all those who told her that it wouldn't come to anything. All good here. What happens in the end? She destroy a reactor and get powers out of luck. Stupendous. all your life trying hard, and in the end your greatest achievement is achieved by luck. When Thor used his powers in a bad way, they ended up taking them away from him, and until he behaved like a true king he didn't get them back. When Captain America was a wimp, he showed that he had a good heart, and they ended up giving him the super soldier serum because of how he was and not because he was a physical master. Tony Stark was an irresponsible man who sold weapons and ended up becoming a hero who gradually improved until he saved half the universe. All of these are authentic cases of improvement, in where the character begins without having anything and in the end achieves everything through his own merit. However, with Carol Danvers we have a girl who worked hard to join the Air Force, and in the end she gets her powers by pure luck. And the most ironic thing of all is that now she can fly through space, meaning that she is never going to fly a plane again in her life. What is the moral of all this? Doesn't matter how much you try, because if you are not lucky you will never stand out. What an often healthy message, yes sir. It's kinda like if a person spends his whole life setting up a business to be rich and in the end he wins 10 million in the lottery and stops working. The message is well intentioned but very poorly transmitted. It takes away a lot of merit from Carol. And finally the third reason, which by the way this one is not so serious but I wanted to comment on it, and it has to do with a contradiction in the movie. Do you remember the thing about that she has nothing to prove? Well, look at this scene, on my shoulders, about to show these boys how we do it. Do y'all have something to prove or not? Because I am getting lost with so much contradiction. Overall, if people criticize this movie it's because of everything that I listed and many more things that I may have left out, not because the protagonist is a woman or because the movie is feminist. The problem is that it's very poorly made, and instead of recognizing it people dedicate themselves to whine about people pointing out issues with the movie and calling them sexists, when in reality the movie is boring, mediocre, and poorly implemented. With all this said, Captain Marvel is a perfect example of how not to make a movie. So yeah, just screw this movie, and if you want to see a better version of this film, go watch The Long Kiss Goodnight, and if you want to see a better superhero movie version of this, go watch Wonder Woman. I'm going to give this a 3 out of 10. Thanks for watching. What's your opinion on this film? Comment below, subscribe, or see you later next time. Bye.